For over a century, we wondered why we seemed to be alone. Speculation abounded. We pondered over the Drake equation, counting the stars in our galaxy, working out how many planets there were around those stars, and how many of those planets were in the habitable zone. We listened for radio signals, pointed telescopes into the void of space to look for technological signatures or signs of biological life, and found almost nothing of note. It appeared that we were alone after all. When I was a kid, I remember watching E.T. the Extraterrestrial with my dad. It was a 50-year-old movie at the time, and the special effects were laughable by today's standards, but I was hooked. From then on, I got addicted to sci-fi, reading classics like Frank Herbert's Dune and Asimov's Foundation. As I got older, I obsessed over wacky alien conspiracy theories, reading alien encounter reports on the internet, speculating with other obsessives over UFO videos and the politics of UAP disclosure, and even dabbling in communities dedicated to ESP and Sci. It was a fun distraction from the endless grind of grad school. By the time I got my PhD in materials engineering, studying the properties and manufacture of certain laminate materials, I had cultivated a small online community of my own, surrounding what we simply refer to as the phenomena. My first job required top secret clearance. That sounds cool to the uninitiated, but in reality, it was very mundane. I was tasked with running a small research group that was testing the properties of new engineered materials for use on stealth drones. Imagine putting a block of ceramic in a vise and cranking it until the ceramic cracks, basically. It felt like grad school all over again. So when a US Space Force recruiter reached out and offered me an interview for a new position, I jumped at the opportunity. The job description was classified and would only be revealed if I passed an interview. I didn't care about that either. The interview site was in a small building on the outskirts of Salt Lake City. There used to be an old medical center. I'm pretty sure they still had the original waiting room chairs from the 2010s. The place was a bit run down and dingy looking, but at the same time, strangely clean. I waited in the waiting room with about 10 other candidates. At least, that's what I assumed they were. We weren't allowed to talk with each other. I was led into another room, where I was asked to surrender all electronic devices and metallic items. I removed my belt and shoes and handed over my cell phone. They asked me if I had any implants, or if I had ever worked in a metalworking shop. I signed a consent form, and they gave me a change of clothes. The clothes were made out of a kind of hospital gown material, and fit pretty well, though it was a little cold to wear such thin fabric. In the next room, a doctor and a behavioral expert grilled me about past drug use. I admitted to smoking weed a few times in high school, but nothing beyond that. They seemed especially concerned about previous use of psychedelic drugs. I explained that my old roommate took acid once and ended up running naked into the street and getting arrested, so I never dared to try it. That story seemed to put them at ease, and they moved me into the next room. The first thing I noticed was that it was loud. A constant humming and the rhythmic sound of a valve opening and closing, venting some sort of gas. In the center of the room was, according to the doctor, a 10 Tesla research MRI machine. They explained that they were going to inject me with a short-acting psychedelic substance and scan my brain patterns. Afterwards, I was to report what I saw, and that would complete my psychological evaluation. I had never heard of such a procedure before, but I was in too deep to back out now. And besides, I really didn't want to go back to squeezing bricks full time. I got in the machine, thank God they gave me earplugs, and they strapped me down so that I wouldn't move too much. Then I felt the needle go into my leg, and from there on, reality dissolved. I felt like I had been asleep for most of my life since childhood, and had just woken up for the first time in years. Everything in nature was connected. How could I have forgotten? I felt all at once both like a prisoner and free as a bird. The whole universe seemed to make sense. It was designed like a machine. My ears started to ring louder and louder, and my vision filled with strange fractal patterns. At this point, I could no longer tell the difference between what I was seeing and what I was thinking. I felt like I was on an operating table. A bright light shined into my eyes. 3 beings were standing above me, with huge black eyes. I felt I could read their thoughts, and as soon as I realized that, words appeared before my eyes, and strange sounds filled my perception. I felt like I was looking at my own body, like my whole life had been the dream of this dying man in an alien hospital. I couldn't move. I didn't know what to feel. I wanted to hide in silence and scream at the same time, but I was deadlocked, powerless to do anything but observe. It became more intense. I felt my body dissolve into pieces. Flowers bloomed hauntingly from every surface. I saw skulls, corpses, and felt horrible emotional pain. It was like 1,000 mothers crying out over their dead children. I was dead. This was hell, and I knew it. I felt like I had sinned, stepped outside of time and space, stared at the face of God, and this was my punishment. Eternity, alone, listening to the living weep over the dead, until finally I took a raspy breath and realized that I was still on the MRI table. Apparently, the entire experience had only lasted 10 minutes. Soon, I was in front of the doctor and 3 agents of some sort. I recounted my experience and they nodded along at first. When I got to the part about the dead, they seemed more interested. The results of the scan came back and they brought me into another room for a briefing. Nothing could have prepared me for what I heard next. They told me that most humans are powerful psychics. So powerful, in fact, that the connection to other living things is too intense to handle in daily life. The working theory was that as infants, we are so oversaturated with psychic noise that our brains simply adapt to filter it out before we even become self-aware. Without that filtering in place, it's unlikely that we will be able to survive, learn, or individuate, as the thoughts, emotions, and impulses of everyone on Earth will drown out our own basic senses. The US government engaged in a number of unethical experiments to come to this conclusion. MKUltra, spreading LSD in countercultural movements and monitoring the outcomes. Operating research chemical shops online to sell the latest trial drugs to internet hippies to test their creations in the wild. It became a point of national security to develop a substance that was safe, didn't eventually drive the user mad, and would allow for experimentation with ESP by trusted government employees. Over the next 6 months, I returned to the facility periodically to run more experiments. They tested me with remote viewing, tasking me to try to determine the material composition of Russian hypersonic missiles, asked me to try to speak with aliens, and to predict what playing cards were in a sealed envelope. Meanwhile, they recorded brain scans. I was terrible at it. I felt like I was just perceiving random garbage. I did predict that the MRI operator's wife was cheating on him. For some reason, it just seemed obvious to me, like reading a book. But even then, it could have been a fluke, since I was failing so badly at the tests. But for some reason, they kept inviting me back. Finally, after the 10th session, I was brought back into the interview room, in my street clothes this time, thankfully. This time joined by a very official-looking man with a Space Force insignia. He explained that the test results were in, and that I was the most sensitive test subject they had seen yet. My hit rate of 29% was, as he explained, an entire standard deviation higher than the next best subject. Then, another reveal. They were going to send me into space. Officially, it was a routine lunar transit mission with NASA. I would be sent under the cover of operating spectroscopy equipment to scan the lunar surface. In reality, I would be functioning as a kind of space telescope. Further away from Earth, the psychic noise would be reduced, and they surmised that the quieter environment would allow me to make contact with intelligent life. I explained this all to Feeler of Water, the entity that appeared to me clear as day from the delightfully quiet dark side of the moon. It was what we called a grey, and looked just like the apparitions that appeared over me in my first MRI experiment. The noise of Earth was still there, in the background, but it was quieter, and I was learning to recognize it and filter it out. The entity seemed to understand me, but I had a lot of trouble understanding it. It communicated strangely, sounds mixed with images, symbols, feelings. It was going to take some time to learn its language. But one thing was finally clear. We were not alone. I recorded what I could in my notebook. I could tell that the entity was nervous or upset about the structure of human society. I decided to leave that out. It wouldn't be the first secret I had kept during this strange adventure. I no longer needed the drugs to open my mind, and I now knew how to filter out the background noise from Earth. It was going to get interesting once back on the ground.